October 24th, 1984, 11:47 p.m., 280 miles northeast of Iceland, North Atlantic Ocean. Commander Richard Hayes gripped the periscope housing as USS Dallas rolled 15 degrees to port. Through the sonar headset pressed against his ear, he heard it, the unmistakable cavitation of Soviet propellers bearing 035, range 12,000 yards. But there was something else, a second contact, closer, much closer. And it was in his baffles, the acoustic blind spot directly behind his submarine, where his own propeller noise made detection impossible. His executive officer looked at him, waiting for orders. Hayes knew that turning to identify the contact would reveal Dallas's position to both Soviet submarines. But not turning meant sailing blind with a potential enemy directly astern. The temperature in the control room dropped as every man held his breath. Hayes had exactly 45 seconds to make a decision that could start World War III. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring you more incredible true stories from naval history. 3 months earlier, Commander Hayes had sat in a briefing room at Naval Submarine Base New London, Connecticut, staring at a classified document stamped in red letters, Operation Baffles, Forbidden Maneuver. The report, dated March 1979, detailed an incident that had nearly caused an international crisis. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Brennan of USS Whale had attempted what submariners called a Baffles ambush, deliberately positioning his submarine in another vessel's acoustic blind spot to gather intelligence without being detected. The maneuver had been practiced in exercises, whispered about in wardrooms, but never officially sanctioned, until Brennan tried it on a Soviet Akela-class submarine off the Kola Peninsula. The Soviet captain, realizing someone was in his baffles, had executed an emergency blow, surfacing his submarine so rapidly that USS Whale barely avoided collision. The incident was classified, buried, and the tactic officially banned by naval intelligence. Hayes remembered the final line of the report. Under no circumstances shall any United States submarine commander position his vessel in the baffles of a foreign contact. Violation will result in immediate court-martial. Hayes had been commanding USS Dallas, a Los Angeles-class fast attack submarine, for 18 months. At 42 years old, he was considered one of the Navy's most promising submarine commanders. His crew of 134 men knew him as demanding but fair, a tactician who could think 3 moves ahead of any adversary. Dallas herself was a marvel of Cold War engineering, 360 feet of steel capable of diving to 950 feet, powered by a nuclear reactor that never needed refueling, armed with Mark 48 torpedoes that could sink a carrier. But on this October night, all that technology meant nothing if Hayes couldn't identify the contact in his baffles. The mission had started routinely enough. Dallas was conducting surveillance operations in the Guyuk Gap, the strategic choke point between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, where Soviet submarines had to pass to reach the Atlantic. Intelligence had reported increased Soviet naval activity. The Northern Fleet was conducting exercises, but there were whispers of something more. A new submarine, possibly a Typhoon-class ballistic missile submarine, the largest ever built, might be making its first patrol. Hayes's orders were clear: locate, track, and report. Do not engage unless fired upon. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, Dallas's sonar officer, was the first to detect the initial contact. 26 years old, she had joined the Navy from San Diego, driven by her father's stories of serving aboard diesel submarines during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Martinez had perfect pitch, a gift that made her one of the best sonar operators in the fleet. She could distinguish between different classes of Soviet submarines by the unique acoustic signature of their propellers. "Con, sonar," she had called out at 23:15 hours. "New contact, designated Sierra 1, bearing 035, range 12,000 yards. Contact is headed west at approximately 12 knots. Analyzing signature now." Hayes had moved to the sonar station, watching the waterfall display cascade green traces down the screen. "What do you have, Martinez?" She adjusted her headset, her eyes closed in concentration. "Sir, preliminary classification suggests Akula class, but there's something odd about the signature. The blade rate is slightly different from our database." Could be a newer variant. The Akula class was Soviet Russia's answer to American submarine superiority. Fast, quiet, and deadly. But Dallas was quieter. Hayes had positioned his submarine at 400 feet, below the thermal layer where temperature differences bent sound waves, making detection more difficult. They had been tracking Sierra 1 for 40 minutes when Martinez suddenly stiffened. "Con, sonar, new contact. Designated Sierra 2, bearing 180, range approximately 4,000 yards. 180, directly behind them, in the baffles." Hayes felt his heart rate increase, but his voice remained calm. "Classification?" Martinez's fingers flew across her console, trying to analyze the fragmentary data. "Sir, Contact is extremely faint. I'm only getting him because he's close. But based on what I'm hearing, it could be another Akula, or..." She trailed off. "Or what, Lieutenant?" "Sir, there are some characteristics that match the intelligence briefs on Typhoon class, but I need a clearer picture to confirm." Executive Officer Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell stepped beside Hayes. Mitchell was 38, a veteran of 6 deterrent patrols aboard Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines. He was methodical, cautious, exactly what Hayes needed in an XO. "Skipper, we need to clear Baffles." "Standard procedure is a 30-degree turn to port. Bring Sierra 2 onto our array." Hayes knew Mitchell was right. Clearing Baffles, turning the submarine to move the blind spot and allow sonar to detect what was behind them, was Submarine Doctrine 101. But it was also the one maneuver that would reveal their presence. The acceleration, the flow noise over the hull, the slight increase in reactor noise as they turned, all of it would light up Sierra 2's sonar like a Christmas tree. "SonarCon, what's Sierra 1 doing?" Martinez checked her display. "Sierra 1 maintaining course and speed, sir. No indication they've detected us." Hayes calculated rapidly. Sierra 1 ahead, Sierra 2 behind? If Sierra 2 was tracking them, why hadn't they reacted? Soviet doctrine called for immediate evasion if a submarine detected a tail, unless Sierra 2 didn't know Dallas was there. Unless this was coincidence, 2 submarines operating in the same water, neither aware of the other. But Hayes didn't believe in coincidence, not in the North Atlantic during the Cold War. He thought about the report, about Lieutenant Commander Brennan and USS Whale, about the forbidden maneuver. If he could position Dallas perfectly in Sierra 2's Baffles, he could gather intelligence without being detected. He could identify whether this was truly a Typhoon class on its maiden patrol. The kind of intelligence that could change the strategic balance, that could give American attack submarines the acoustic signature they needed to track Russia's most powerful weapon. But what Brennan didn't know was that the Soviet captain had installed a towed array sonar, a cable trailed behind the submarine that could detect contacts in the Baffles. Whale had been seconds away from being torpedoed when Brennan broke off. "Captain, we need to make a decision." Mitchell's voice was quiet but firm. Hayes looked around the control room. Young faces, most of them in their 20s, trained for this moment but never truly tested. Petty Officer, 2nd class. Marcus Thompson at the helm, 19 years old from rural Alabama. Lieutenant David Chen at the weapons console, 27, who had graduated top of his class at Annapolis. Chief of the boat William Bull Ramirez, 45. With 26 years in submarines, watching Hayes with knowing eyes. These men trusted him to bring them home. "All ahead 1/3. Make your depth 500 feet. Descend at 2 degrees down bubble." The diving officer acknowledged. Dallas angled downward, the deck tilting slightly beneath their feet. Hayes was banking on oceanography. At 500 feet, there was another thermal layer, a boundary where warmer water sat atop colder water. Sound behaves strangely at these boundaries, sometimes refracting upward, creating acoustic shadows. If he positioned Dallas just right, Sierra 2's passive sonar might not detect the subtle sounds of their descent. Martinez's voice was tense. "Con, sonar. Sierra 2, maintaining bearing 180. Range now 3,800 yards and closing slowly. Sierra 1 still ahead, no change." They were moving deeper into the trap, or moving into position. It depended entirely on whether Sierra 2 knew they were there. Hayes moved to the chart table where Lieutenant Junior Grade Amy Foster, the navigation officer, had plotted their position and the 2 contacts. Foster was 24, from Boston, with a master's degree in oceanography from MIT. "Lieutenant, what's the bottom depth here?" Foster checked the chart. "Sir, ocean floor is at 2,800 fathoms, over 16,000 feet. Deep water." "Good. Plenty of room to maneuver if things went wrong." Hayes made his decision. It was the kind of decision that could end a career or make a legend. "Helm, prepare for a maneuver called the Baffles track. I need absolute precision. We're going to match Sierra 2's course and speed, staying directly in their Baffles." Mitchell's eyes widened. "Captain, that's forbidden, I know. But we're not doing what Brennan did. We're not getting aggressive. We're gathering intelligence and staying invisible. Sonar, I need you to give me real-time updates on both contacts. Any change in Sierra 2's speed, any turn, any indication they're pinging active sonar, you tell me immediately." Martinez nodded, her face pale but determined. "Aye, sir. But, Captain, if they have a towed array, then we'll know very quickly." Hayes turned to the weapons officer. "Chen, I want tubes 1 and 2 flooded and outer doors closed. If this goes sideways, I need us ready to defend ourselves, but I don't want any flow noise from open torpedo tube doors." Chen's hands moved across his console. "Flooding tubes 1 and 2, aye, outer doors remaining closed." The next 30 minutes were the longest of Hayes' life. Dallas crept through the dark water, matching the unseen submarine ahead. Martinez called out bearings and ranges in a quiet monotone. Sierra 2 bearing 185, range 3,500 yards. Slight course change to port. Recommend we come left to 190. Hayes gave the order, and Thompson at the helm made the correction with delicate precision. They were dancing with a partner who didn't know they were on the dance floor. Chief Ramirez moved beside Hayes, speaking in a low voice that wouldn't carry. "Skipper, the crew's with you, but they're scared. They know what you're doing." Hayes appreciated the honesty. "You ever do anything like this, Chief?" Ramirez's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "Once. Long time ago. 1968, aboard USS Sturgeon, tracking a Soviet Echo 2 off Vladivostok. Our captain did something similar. Stayed in their Baffles for 6 hours. Got the best intelligence photographs of a Soviet submarine the Navy had ever seen. Also got relieved of command when we got back to Pearl Harbor. Last I heard, he was teaching high school mathematics in Oregon." The story wasn't encouraging, but Hayes understood the message. Some things were worth the risk. Some intelligence was worth a career. Martinez suddenly sat upright, her body rigid. "Con, sonar. Sierra 2 is slowing, speed decreasing to 8 knots. They're also ascending. Current depth estimate 500 feet, same as us." Mitchell gripped the chart table. "They know we're here. They're trying to clear their Baffles." But Martinez shook her head. "Sir, I don't think so. If they knew we were here, they'd be turning or going deep or sprinting away. This looks like a scheduled maneuver. They're on some kind of predetermined course." Hayes saw the opportunity. "Helm, slow to 8 knots. Maintain depth and bearing." Dallas decelerated smoothly. Modern nuclear submarines could change speed without the dramatic engine noises that plagued older boats. The reactor simply produced less steam, the turbines spun slower, the propeller turned more gently through the water. They matched Sierra 2's speed perfectly, staying locked in the blind spot. "Sonar, can you get a better classification now that they've slowed?" Martinez adjusted her filters, isolating different frequencies. Her eyes closed again as she listened to the symphony of the ocean. Biologics, whales and dolphins, distant shipping, the rush of water over Dallas's own hull. And there, beneath it all, the distinctive sound of Sierra 2. "Captain, I'm getting blade rate and shaft RPM, running it through the database now." Seconds ticked by. The computer analyzed the acoustic signature, comparing it against known Soviet submarine classes. Martinez's screen displayed a match probability. Her breath caught. "Sir, confirmed classification. Contact Sierra 2 is a Typhoon-class ballistic missile submarine. Confidence level 92%. The control room went absolutely silent. A Typhoon, the Soviet Union's ultimate weapon. Each one carried 20 R-39 ballistic missiles, each missile with 10 nuclear warheads. 200 nuclear weapons on a single submarine, enough to destroy 200 cities. Moscow had built them as their ace in the hole. Submarines so large and so heavily armed that even if NATO destroyed every Soviet land-based missile, every bomber, every surface ship, the Typhoons could still devastate North America and Europe. And Dallas was sitting in its Baffles, close enough to hear its heartbeat. Hayes felt the weight of the moment. This intelligence could change everything. If Martinez was right, if this was indeed a Typhoon on patrol, then American submarines now had its acoustic signature. They could track these behemoths wherever they went. The strategic deterrent Russia counted on would be compromised. "Sonar, can you identify any unique characteristics? Anything that distinguishes this specific boat from others in its class?" Martinez was already working the problem. "Sir, there's a slight harmonic in the 600 Hz range. Could be a manufacturing defect in one of the reduction gears. Also detecting what sounds like a failing bearing in the port main coolant pump. This boat has a mechanical signature we could identify anywhere in the world's oceans. It was intelligence gold." But Hayes knew he couldn't stay in the Baffles forever. Eventually, the Typhoon would turn or change depth and Dallas would be exposed. "XO, prepare a contact report. Encryption level maximum. I want this sent via extremely low frequency as soon as we're clear of these contacts." Mitchell moved to the communications station to draft the message. LF communication was slow, measured in minutes per sentence, but it was the only way to communicate with a deeply submerged submarine without coming to periscope depth and risking detection. Hayes checked the chronometer. They had been tracking the Typhoon for 96 minutes. Sierra 1, the Akula-class submarine, was still ahead, still apparently unaware of Dallas or the Typhoon. It was an intelligence officer's dream scenario. 3 submarines operating in close proximity, none of them aware of the others, except Dallas knew about both Soviet boats. "Captain, Sierra 1 is turning." Martinez's voice cut through his thoughts. "Coming right to 090, speed increasing to 15 knots. Hayes cursed silently. If Sierra 1 turned enough, they would have Dallas on their sonar. And if Dallas maneuvered to avoid Sierra 1, they'd lose their position in the Typhoon's baffles. "Sonar! Time until Sierra 1 has us on their beam," Martinez calculated quickly. "At current turn rate and speeds, approximately 4 minutes until they could detect us." 4 minutes to decide. Hayes could break off now, drift away from the Typhoon, put distance between Dallas and both Soviet submarines. The safe choice, the career-preserving choice, or he could stay in position, gather more intelligence, and risk a three-way encounter that could escalate into something catastrophic. He thought about his wife, Jennifer, back in Groton, Connecticut. His daughter, Emily, 7 years old, who thought her father drove buses for a living because that's what Jennifer told her. Classified deployments didn't allow for much truth. He thought about the 133 men aboard Dallas, men who had families, dreams, futures that depended on his judgment. "Helm, come right to 200, slow to 6 knots. Let's drift out of the Typhoon's baffles nice and easy. Sonar, keep me informed on both Sierra contacts." It was time to leave the party. They had what they came for. Thompson adjusted Dallas's course gently. The submarine responded like a well-trained horse, turning smoothly through the dark water. Martinez monitored both contacts. Sierra 1 continuing turn to starboard. Sierra 2 maintaining course and speed. "Con, we're clear of Sierra 2's baffles. They're now bearing 175, range 4,200 yards. Hayes allowed himself a small breath of relief. They were clear. They had executed a forbidden maneuver, gathered critical intelligence, and escaped without detection. But the night wasn't over. "Captain, Sierra 1 is pinging. Active sonar." The control room erupted in controlled chaos. Active sonar meant the Akula had detected something and was actively searching. High-frequency pulses of sound would be rippling through the water, bouncing off anything solid, revealing its location. "Is it us? Did they detect Dallas?" Martinez listened intently, watching her displays. "Negative, sir. The pings are focused ahead of their position. They're searching in the wrong direction. But, sir..." She paused, her face showing realization. "Sir, those pings are going to paint the Typhoon. Sierra 1 doesn't know the Typhoon is there." Hayes understood immediately. The Akula-class submarine, conducting its own patrol, had detected something anomalous. Maybe a whale, maybe a temperature inversion, maybe just a sonar operator's imagination. So they had gone active, sending out pulses to identify the contact. And those pulses were about to reveal the Typhoon. "Con, sonar. Sierra 2 is reacting. Massive increase in propeller noise. They're sprinting. Speed increasing through 20 knots, 25, still accelerating." The Typhoon had been caught by surprise, sitting quietly on patrol, suddenly illuminated by active sonar from a submarine they hadn't known was there. Their captain would be furious, their crew scrambling to battle stations. And their first assumption would be that they were under attack. Well, Sierra 2 has launched a noisemaker, detect countermeasures in the water. The Typhoon was deploying acoustic decoys, devices that created false targets to confuse incoming torpedoes, which meant they thought someone had fired at them. "Captain, Sierra 1 has ceased pinging. They're turning hard to port and increasing speed. They know they've stumbled into something big." The tactical situation had deteriorated from controlled intelligence gathering to potential combat in less than 30 seconds. 2 Soviet submarines, both now aware something was wrong, both potentially aware of each other, both possibly thinking they were under attack. And Dallas, invisible in the middle of it all. Mitchell moved beside Hayes. "Skipper, recommend we clear the area. This could turn into a shooting match real quick." Hayes agreed, but there was a problem. "If we sprint out of here, both of them will hear us. They'll know a third submarine was present. Sierra 2 will know we were in their baffles. This whole operation will be compromised." "And if we stay?" Mitchell asked. "If we stay, we watch. We see how this plays out. We gather intelligence on how Soviet submarines react when they encounter each other unexpectedly. That's also valuable." It was a rationalization, Hayes knew. The smart move was to leave, but he was committed now, committed to gathering every scrap of intelligence possible from this unprecedented situation. "Helm, I'll stop. Let's go quiet and drift. Sonar, full passive array. I want to know everything that happens." Dallas's propeller stopped turning. The submarine coasted forward on momentum, gradually slowing, becoming acoustically invisible. In the control room, men barely breathed. Martinez provided a running commentary. Sierra 1 bearing 045, range 9,000 yards and increasing. Speed 30 knots. They're running northwest. Sierra 2 bearing 170, range 6,000 yards and increasing. Speed has stabilized at 28 knots, heading southwest. The 2 Soviet submarines were fleeing in opposite directions, each captain probably assuming they had encountered an American attack submarine. Neither knew about the other. Neither knew about Dallas, still sitting quietly between their retreating courses. Con, sonar, I'm detecting communications. UHF radio frequency. Sierra 2 has deployed a communications buoy and is transmitting. The Typhoon was reporting the incident to Northern Fleet headquarters. Within hours, Soviet naval intelligence would be analyzing what happened. They would know their ballistic missile submarine had been detected. They would change patrol routes, modify operating procedures, possibly even investigate whether they had a security leak. Hayes felt the weight of what they had accomplished and what it might cost. The intelligence was invaluable, but the incident would have consequences. XO, finalize that contact report. Add details on the encounter between Sierra 1 and Sierra 2. Include acoustic signatures, tactical responses, everything. This needs to reach Sublint as soon as possible. Mitchell worked with the radio operator, compressing hours of data into an encrypted burst transmission. Dallas would have to come shallow to transmit, but they were alone now, both Soviet submarines having fled the area. Helm, make your depth 150 feet. Slow ascent, 5 degrees up bubble. Dallas rose through the thermocline, the boundary between water masses, creating turbulence that rattled through the hull. At 150 feet, they were deep enough to avoid surface traffic, but shallow enough to extend a communications mast. Radio, Con, prepare to transmit contact report via satellite burst. The radio operator aligned the transmission equipment. In 3 seconds, Dallas would send everything they had learned. The Typhoon's signature, the tactical encounter, the strategic intelligence that could alter the Cold War's balance. Transmitting now, sir. The burst went out, racing toward a satellite in geosynchronous orbit, then down to naval communications facilities in the United States. Within minutes, it would be on Admiral Carrington's desk at Submarine Forces Atlantic. Within hours, it would reach the Pentagon. Within days, it would change how the U.S. Navy tracked Soviet ballistic missile submarines. Transmission complete, sir. Receipt acknowledged. Hayes nodded. Very well. Helm, make your depth 400 feet. Come to course 270. We're going home. As Dallas descended back into the depths, turning westward toward home waters, Hayes allowed himself to feel the exhaustion that had been building since they first detected Sierra 2. He had violated a direct order. He had executed a forbidden maneuver. He had risked his submarine and crew for intelligence, and it had worked. Chief Ramirez appeared at his shoulder again. Captain, permission to speak freely? Granted, Chief. Sir, that was either the gutsiest or the dumbest thing I've seen in 26 years of submarines. I'm not sure which. Hayes smiled tiredly. We'll find out when we get back to New London, won't we? The transit back to Connecticut took 5 days. Dallas ran deep and quiet, avoiding all contacts, focused on returning home safely. Hayes spent the time preparing his report, documenting every decision, every tactical consideration, every piece of intelligence gathered. He knew he would be called before a board of inquiry. The question was whether he would face commendation or court-martial. Lieutenant Martinez stopped by the captain's stateroom on the 3rd day of transit. Sir, do you have a moment? Come in, Lieutenant. What's on your mind? She sat down carefully, her young face serious. Captain, I've been thinking about what we did. About the Baffles track. I just wanted you to know that from a sonar operator's perspective, it was textbook perfect. We gathered intelligence that will save American lives. Whatever happens when we get back, you made the right call. Hayes appreciated her loyalty. Thank you, Sarah. But you should know that making the right tactical call and making the right career call are sometimes 2 different things. If they decide to make an example of me, your association with this incident could follow you. Sir, I joined the Navy to serve, to do things that matter. We did something that mattered. I'll stand by that regardless of the consequences. After she left, Hayes thought about the younger generation of submariners. They had been raised in the shadow of nuclear weapons, trained to fight a war that everyone prayed would never happen. Yet they showed remarkable courage and integrity. It gave him hope for the service's future. USS Dallas surfaced in Long Island Sound on November 4th, 1984, at 06:30 hours. The morning was cold, the sky gray with approaching winter. A pilot boat guided them through the submarine channel toward Naval Submarine Base New London. As they approached the pier, Hayes could see a crowd waiting. Naval intelligence officers, Sublint staff, and several officers in dress uniforms he didn't recognize. This was not a normal return from patrol. The moment Dallas was secured to the pier, 3 officers in suits came aboard. Naval intelligence. The lead investigator, Commander Peterson, was polite but firm. Commander Hayes, you're ordered to report to Admiral Carrington's office at 1400 hours today. Until then, you're confined to base. Please turn over command of Dallas to your executive officer. Hayes felt his stomach tighten, but he maintained his composure. Understood. He gathered his personal gear, said goodbye to his crew, and watched as Mitchell took command of the submarine he had guided through one of the most dangerous intelligence operations of the Cold War. Lieutenant Chen approached as Hayes prepared to leave. "Skipper, the crew wants you to know we're behind you." "Whatever you need, we'll testify to what happened out there." Hayes shook his hand. "Take care of yourselves, Lieutenant. Focus on your careers. Don't let my decisions impact your futures." Admiral Thomas Carrington's office was in the headquarters building overlooking the Thames River. Hayes reported at precisely 1400 hours, wearing his service dress blues, every ribbon and insignia perfectly aligned. The Admiral's aide escorted him into a conference room where 5 officers waited. Admiral Carrington sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 captains Hayes didn't recognize, Commander Peterson from Naval Intelligence and Captain Robert Shaw, the senior submarine warfare officer at Sublint. "Commander Hayes, please sit." Admiral Carrington was 61 years old, with 40 years in the Navy, including 20 years in submarines. He was known as demanding but fair, a strategic thinker who had helped shape modern submarine doctrine. Hayes sat, spine straight, eyes forward. Admiral Carrington opened a folder containing Hayes's report. "Commander, I've read your after-action report 3 times. I've listened to the sonar recordings. I've reviewed the intelligence Dallas gathered, and I've consulted with the Chief of Naval Operations regarding this matter." The silence stretched for several seconds. "What you did was unauthorized, against explicit orders, and violated established doctrine." Hayes kept his expression neutral. "Yes, sir. It was also brilliant, tactically sound, and produced intelligence that has already changed our operational plans for tracking Soviet ballistic missile submarines." The Admiral leaned back in his chair. "You put your crew at risk. You violated the prohibition on Baffles tracking. You made decisions that could have started a shooting war." "Yes, sir. I accept full responsibility." Captain Shaw spoke up. "Commander, walk us through your decision process. When you detected Sierra 2 in your Baffles, at what point did you decide to execute the Baffles track?" Hayes took a breath. "Sir, it was when Lieutenant Martinez identified the contact as potentially Typhoon class. We've been looking for the acoustic signature of those boats since they first entered service. The opportunity to gather that intelligence in a tactical situation where we had the advantage seemed worth the calculated risk." "Calculated risk?" Admiral Carrington repeated the phrase. "Commander, you're aware that Lieutenant Commander Brennan's career ended because he attempted something similar?" "Yes, sir. I read the classified report on USS Whale's incident, but with respect, sir, Brennan's situation was different. He positioned Whale aggressively, trying to force a reaction. We maintained a passive posture, gathering intelligence without provocation. When the tactical situation changed, we withdrew." One of the captains Hayes didn't know spoke. "I'm Captain Anderson, Naval Intelligence. Commander, the intelligence you gathered is extraordinary. The Typhoon's acoustic signature, the behavioral response patterns, the documentation of Soviet communications, procedures, it's all highly valuable, but the method troubles us. If we reward this kind of initiative, we could encourage reckless behavior across the submarine force." Hayes understood the concern. "Sir, I'm not advocating that Baffles tracking becomes standard procedure. It was a unique situation with specific tactical considerations that made it feasible, but banning an entire category of tactical maneuver because of one incident 5 years ago seems overly restrictive. We train submarine commanders to make complex decisions in dynamic situations. Then we tie their hands with blanket prohibitions." Admiral Carrington studied Hayes carefully. "You're arguing for tactical flexibility." "Sir, I'm arguing that we trust the judgment of commanding officers we've selected and trained for these positions. Give us the doctrine, the guidelines, the intelligence priorities, then let us execute missions using the tools available." The Admiral glanced at the other officers, some silent communication passing between them. "Commander Hayes, this board has reviewed your record. 6 fitness reports, all outstanding. Your crew's loyalty is exceptional. We've received letters from 17 of your officers and enlisted men defending your actions. The intelligence community has designated your Dallas patrol as possibly the most significant submarine intelligence operation since USS Parshe tapped Soviet underwater cables in the Sea of Okhotsk." Hayes felt a glimmer of hope, but kept his expression neutral. "However," the Admiral continued, "we cannot simply ignore that you violated explicit orders. There must be consequences." Hayes nodded. "I understand, sir. Therefore, you are hereby reprimanded for failure to follow established procedures. This reprimand will be placed in your permanent record." A reprimand, not a court-martial, not relief from command. A reprimand was serious, but survivable. "Additionally," Admiral Carrington said, and Hayes' heart sank, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Additionally, you're ordered to work with Naval Intelligence and the Submarine Warfare Development Group to develop new doctrine for intelligence gathering in close proximity to hostile submarines." We're calling it the Hayes Protocol. Hayes blinked in surprise. Sir? Captain Shaw smiled slightly. Commander, you've demonstrated that the blanket prohibition on Baffles operations was too restrictive. But you're right that we can't have every submarine commander out there cowboying around in Russian Baffles, so we need doctrine, rules of engagement, guidelines for when this kind of operation is justified, and how to execute it safely. You're going to write it. Admiral Carrington stood and everyone else came to attention. Commander Hayes, you're a fine submarine officer. You have excellent tactical instincts and sound judgment, even if your interpretation of orders leaves something to be desired. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Your return to command of USS Dallas, effective immediately. The reprimand stands, but it will not prevent your promotion to captain when you're due. Now go take care of your submarine and your crew. Hayes saluted sharply. Aye, sir. Thank you, sir. As he left the conference room, he felt the tension that had gripped him for 5 days finally release. He had gambled his career and won. But more importantly, he had proven that tactical innovation, even when it violated doctrine, had a place in naval warfare. Captain Shaw walked out with him. Hayes, off the record? Yes, sir. That was some of the finest submarine driving I've seen in 30 years. But don't make a habit of it. You got lucky that both Soviet boats reacted the way they did. You got lucky that your sonar operator was skilled enough to identify the contacts accurately. You got lucky that nobody got trigger happy and started shooting. Luck runs out. Understood, sir. But may I say something? Go ahead. Sir, it wasn't all luck. We train for these situations. We prepare, we practice, we develop instincts, and when the moment comes, we trust those instincts and our training. That's what we did out there. Shaw nodded slowly. Fair point. Just remember that every time you trust those instincts, you're betting lives. Your crew's lives. Make sure the prize is worth the price. Hayes returned to Dallas to find his crew waiting on the pier. When they saw him walking back in uniform, still in command, a cheer went up. Chief Ramirez met him at the gangway. Welcome back, Skipper. We never doubted you. Lieutenant Martinez was grinning. Captain, does this mean we're not all getting court-martialed? Hayes smiled. Not today, Lieutenant, but we have work to do. Apparently, we're writing new doctrine. Over the next 6 months, Hayes worked with naval intelligence to codify the lessons learned from Operation Baffles. The Hayes Protocol, as it became officially known, established specific criteria for close proximity intelligence gathering. It required commander approval, detailed tactical planning, specific intelligence value thresholds, and extensive crew training. Most importantly, it trusted submarine commanders to make complex tactical decisions while providing them with better guidelines and support. The protocol was classified top secret, distributed only to submarine commanding officers, and became part of advanced submarine warfare training at the Naval Submarine School. The Soviet Union never publicly acknowledged the incident in the North Atlantic, but within weeks, Typhoon-class submarines began operating with towed array sonars deployed during patrols, specifically to detect contacts in their baffles. Soviet submarine doctrine changed, emphasizing random course and speed changes to prevent tracking. The Northern Fleet increased submarine patrols in the GI-UK gap, clearly concerned that NATO had improved its detection capabilities, all of which told U.S. naval intelligence that the Soviets knew they had been compromised, even if they didn't know exactly how. Commander Hayes was promoted to captain in 1986 and eventually commanded a submarine squadron. He retired in 1997 as a rear admiral, having spent his career advocating for tactical flexibility and trusting the judgment of submarine commanders. The USS Dallas continued to serve with distinction until decommissioning in 1998, participating in numerous intelligence operations that remain classified to this day. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez rose to command her own submarine, USS Alexandria, becoming one of the first female submarine commanders in U.S. Navy history when the ban on women serving aboard submarines was lifted in 2010. The story of the Baffles ambush remained classified until 2015, when portions were declassified as part of Cold War historical documentation. Even today, many details remain secret, including the specific acoustic signatures gathered and the full extent of intelligence derived from that October night in 1984. But among submarine officers, the Hayes Protocol represents something important. The recognition that rules exist to guide judgment, not replace it, and that sometimes the most valuable intelligence requires calculated risks. The Cold War is over now. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, the Typhoon-class submarines were mostly retired or scrapped, and the underwater cat-and-mouse game of submarine warfare has changed dramatically. But the lessons learned that night in the North Atlantic remain relevant. In any high-stakes environment, whether military, business, or personal life, there comes a moment when leaders must decide whether to follow established procedures or trust their judgment and take a calculated risk. Commander Hayes made that choice. He weighed the potential intelligence value against the risks to his crew and his career. He executed a forbidden maneuver with precision and discipline. He gathered intelligence that changed the strategic balance of the Cold War, and when called to account, he stood by his decisions and accepted responsibility. That's leadership. Not the reckless disregard of rules, but the thoughtful evaluation of when rules must be set aside for a greater purpose. The Navy recognized this by creating doctrine that gave future commanders the same tactical flexibility Hayes had claimed for himself. They understood that submarine warfare, like all warfare, requires officers who can think independently, assess dynamic situations, and make complex decisions under pressure. The Hayes Protocol didn't encourage cowboys. It encouraged thoughtful professionals who could be trusted with dangerous responsibilities. Today, submarine commanders still study the Dallas incident at the Naval War College. They analyze Hayes' decision-making process, the tactical execution, the intelligence value gained, and the risks accepted. Some argue he should have been court-martialed. Others argue he should have received the Navy Cross. Most recognize it as an exceptional moment that defies simple judgment, a reminder that real-world decisions rarely fit neatly into doctrine and regulations. The men who served aboard USS Dallas that night remember it differently. For them, it wasn't about doctrine or career consequences or strategic intelligence. It was about trusting their captain, executing their duties with precision, and experiencing a moment of extraordinary professional accomplishment. They were part of something that mattered, something that would be remembered and studied long after they left the service. That kind of experience defines a career, creates bonds that last a lifetime, and reminds sailors why they chose to serve in the silent service, where victories are rarely acknowledged and sacrifices are never publicized. The lesson of the Baffles ambush isn't that rules should be broken casually, or that commanders should operate without regard for doctrine. The lesson is that exceptional situations require exceptional judgment, that leadership means accepting responsibility for difficult decisions, and that sometimes the most valuable contributions come from people willing to risk everything for a principle they believe in. Commander Richard Hayes believed that gathering critical intelligence about Soviet strategic weapons was worth the risk to his career. His crew believed in him enough to follow him into a situation that violated explicit orders, and the Navy ultimately had the wisdom to recognize that both were right. That's the real story behind the report that revealed why admirals banned the Baffles ambush and why they eventually authorized it again, under better doctrine, with better training, and with trust in the commanders they had carefully selected and prepared for exactly these kinds of decisions.